These are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Lisa Benson with iShade. I wanted to thank you all for being with us today. I want to introduce Jeff Phillips with collegefrog.com, and Jeff is going to give you a little information and then introduce our guest speaker for today. Here you go, Jeff.
Hey, Lisa, thank you. And thanks, everyone, for joining our webinar and for participating in National Meet the Firms Week. I'm Jeff Phillips with College Frog, and just wanted to tell you a little bit about the week that we've had. Technically, it's not National Meet the Firms Week. That was last week. But because of some of our presenters were unfortunately affected by Hurricane Sandy, we were postponing today's webinar, obviously. And then we have one more webinar that will be on November the 20th, and that's Life in a Mid-Sized Firm, sponsored by the Association of Accounting Administrators. So look for more information on that. So National Meet the Firms Week, we've had over 200 accounting firms across the country have registered. If you are registered for this event tomorrow, your profile and resume that are built on College Frog will be distributed to all the firms who are in your state that participated in Meet the Firms. So be sure if you've registered that your resume is uploaded in College Frog. If you have any problems with the website or not getting a resume in, send us an email. We're at support@collegefrog.com, and we will respond to you within 24 hours. And lastly, if you haven't registered for National Meet the Firms Week, it is not too late. Go to www.meetthefirmsweek.com. You'll receive a profile on College Frog that's distributed, as I mentioned earlier, and you'll receive great offers from our incredible partners, including membership to iShade, thank you, Lisa, again, and Accounting Today subscription, raffles for gifts such as an iPad, and a half scholarship for Becker CPA Exam review. Lisa and iShade, we thank you for facilitating the webinar today. And iShade, if you don't know, is the social network for the accounting profession. So be sure to build a profile there. And lastly, thank you to Becker, just an outstanding partner throughout National Meet the Firms Week. I can't say that enough. It's a wonderful product. It's a wonderful team. And Diana and Stacy and Peter, you guys are awesome, as the people on the phone and the students are about to find out. So. Enough of that. I want to tell you about Peter Olinto. Many of you know Peter already. He's our speaker today, and he's a national lead instructor for Becker's CPA Exam Review. He is known as one of the industry's most dynamic speakers. He even appears on many of Becker's course lectures that are on CDs and online. So Peter graduated from Pace University. He actually took the Becker CPA Exam Review. And Peter, I hope you don't mind me bragging on you, but he passed all 4 parts of the exam on his first try. Not bad. And besides being an auditor at Deloitte and Touche, he went on to get a law degree at Fordham, spent 10 years as an instructor at Fordham, and then joined Becker in 1998. Thank you all once again for being here. And Peter, I'd like to pass it off to you and first say thank you so much for leading us today. So Peter, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it. And also want to thank everybody for your time. I know time is of the essence and we're all very busy, so I'm going to try to use your time as wisely as possible. First and foremost, the CPA, what's the importance, why get certified, why go through the entire process? So you need to be motivated. So right up front, why do it? It is possible, although not probable, that your motivation for getting certified could be your love of accounting. But I'm going to assume that that's not the case. So why would you want to get the CPA? First and foremost, to me, if you're going to get a degree in accounting, to me it's like going to law school. No, there's no one who goes to law school and then doesn't pass the bar exam. If you want to get a full return on your investment, you got to pass the bar. Everyone who's an accounting major should absolutely become certified. First of all, if you're going to be within the profession, if you're going to be in public accounting, most firms will not promote you, not even to senior, unless you get certified. You certainly will not get promoted to manager unless you're certified. So if you stay in the profession and you want to get the biggest return, you have to get certified. But even if you're on the fence and saying you don't know if you want to be a lifelong accountant, which is fine, I can tell you from personal experience, that when I applied to law school, the fact that I was a CPA and I had, Big Four work experience working with Deloitte, I know that significantly enhanced my application to law school. And I actually got personalized acceptance letters referencing my experience as a CPA. And then I went on to pursue what's called the CFA for Chartered Financial Analyst. So if you decide it's not law, but you want to go into finance, the credential to have in finance, if you want to be an equity or fixed income analyst, a portfolio manager, you want to be in investment banking, the credential to have is what they call become a Chartered Financial Analyst. But lo and behold, what's the most heavily tested topic on that exam? It's accounting. So your background as an accountant will serve you so well the rest of your career. So really your motivation, I think, right up front, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying it, should be money and opportunity. Just a little exercise for after this seminar, if you have time, Google the salary differential between somebody who's certified and somebody who's uncertified. Depending upon where you live throughout the U.S., that differential could be as much as $25,000 or more. And that's not just a one-time differential. I mean, that's an annual differential, and many of you are going to have a 30 or 40-year career ahead of you. So get your financial calculator out. If you take that differential in income, discount it back at 3%, it's worth well in excess of $500,000. So that's the good news. The bad news is the time you have to put in. Anything that's worth having obviously doesn't come easy. Sitting for the CPA exam and being properly prepared, which is really what the emphasis of today's lecture is about, you could easily put in 400 to 500 hours. But it's not 400 or 500 hours every single year. I mean, it's what you do one time and you have the credential the rest of your life. So we're going to get you set. We're going to tell you everything you need to know to be eligible for the exam, to register for the exam, study. And then on the back end, if you have any questions, we'll be happy to take those questions. Okay, so obtaining your CPA license, the first thing I want to emphasize is every single state is unique. Obviously, we can't address all the different states. So we're going to give you some kind of generic rules, the majority view on how most states do it. But with that being said, you've got to understand that when you look at your particular situation, you want to definitely research the state you want to get licensed in and then confirm what are their specific requirements with respect to education and so on and so forth. Just so that you know, the CPA process, there are basically 4 partners in this process. So you'll get your license from the state. There are actually 55 jurisdictions that can issue a license. So the license itself comes at the jurisdiction level. But then there's an organization called NASBA, the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy. Their job is really to promote uniformity around the U.S. So they're kind of like a central clearinghouse for all the different jurisdictions, all the states. They're going to gather all the information on all of you, all the candidates. They're going to get all the scores, all the information. So that's the role of NASBA. And while I'm at it, I will mention the uniformity of the license. Many of you are going to be concerned that you might be going to school in one state, but then thinking about moving after graduation to another state and where should you apply for your license. I'll just tell you right up front, because it's a uniform exam for the most part, it doesn't really matter what state you get licensed in. So you could be licensed in the state of California, but then move to New York. You could still put CPA on your resume, on your business card. It doesn't affect your ability to do that. The state you get licensed in really becomes important if at some point in your career you want to sign off on an audit. Well, then for you to be legally allowed to sign off on that audit in a particular state, that's when you would need to be licensed in that state. But outside of that, it's a very mobile credential. So for the most part, what you want to do is probably get licensed in the state where you think you'll be taking your first job. I mean, that's a logical way to do it. But if some of you are thinking, hey, I want to go to graduate school or law school, then you're going to want to search for a state that's most lenient when it comes to the experience requirement, as you're going to say. But nonetheless, NASBA kind of promotes the uniformity across the country so that you can have that interstate practice. The next organization that's a partner in all this is the AICPA. So the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants is the largest professional organization for the CPAs. They're going to determine the content of the exam, the questions, the scores. They do all the statistical analysis. So that's the role of the AICPA. And then the last organization you'll hear us talk about is Prometric. So Prometric operates this network of computer-based test centers all around the world. So even though you, let's say, want to get licensed in California, you could actually sit for the exam, physically take it at a Prometric center in Texas or New Jersey. It doesn't matter. So those are the four organizations: the state, NASBA, AICPA, and Prometric. Every state is a little bit different. First step in this process is going to be NASBA.org, as you're going to see. NASBA.org is going to be able to show you, they're going to have a nice, neat summary of all the key requirements of all the different states. So that's a general summary of all the licensure requirements. But regardless of the state, here's some of the generic rules. Okay, the education in most states, again, not all, but most states, to be eligible to sit for the exam, you've got to have 120 semester credit hours. Certain states differ as to how many credit hours they want in law or tax, but for the most part, it's 120 credit hours to be eligible to sit for the exam. Some states allow you to sit in your graduating semester, even though you don't have your degree yet. Most states, though, don't do that. They'll let you sit for the exam, but they want you to already have your degree. So again, that's some of the details you'll have to research with your state. Like, I happen to know New York will let you sit in your graduating semester, even though you don't have your degree. Other states, again, you need it. Bottom line is, take this exam as quickly as possible after you graduate. The vast majority of the content on this exam you will never see in practice. And the longer you're at a school, the harder it's going to be to pass. So if anybody out there, if you're still in college, if you're only a sophomore or a junior, you might want to think about having a relatively light load in your graduating semester so that you can start preparing for the exam. Okay, insofar as licensure goes, to actually get the license, that's where most states require the 150 semester hours, the equivalent of a master's degree. But you don't need the 150 hours in most states to be eligible to sit for the exam, but you do need that ultimately to get your license. Now, the exam itself. Okay, first of all, the application process. So the application process, for the most part, for many of you, is going to start with your State Board of Accountancy, or if it's a small state, maybe Vermont, New Hampshire, sometimes they designate an agent on their behalf, which would more likely than not be NASBA, to get the application. But nonetheless, NASBA's website will tell you what that particular jurisdiction requires as far as the application process goes. Now, when you submit your application, you're going to have to submit some fees, as you're going to see in just a little bit. So it could be some or all of the application and or examination fees, as we'll see in just a little bit. The exam itself, you got to pass all four parts. You don't have to pass all four parts at once. You don't have to take all four parts. In the old days, so to speak, you had to take all four parts over a 2 or 3 day period. Now you don't need to do that. You can and you should divide and conquer. You don't want to take too many parts of the exam too close together. You want to make sure you're focusing one part at a time. The reason being is, back in the day when they made you sit for all four parts, they didn't test the kind of detail that they're testing today. So you can and you should take advantage of that divide and conquering process. So the four sections, you got financial accounting and reporting, as we'll see in a little bit, is for the most part your intermediate accounting. Your auditing, most of you are going to be very well prepared for audit. All schools have 1 or 2 classes in audit, so you'll be well prepared for that. Regulation and business environment are different in that they're only 3-hour exams. Regulation, you'll see, is primarily tax and law, and BEC is kind of a little bit of everything, but unfortunately not a lot of anything. So we'll see how BEC kind of combines a lot of different topics. The one thing that I want to emphasize right up front, you want to be very careful about sitting for regulation and financial in the same window. A window is a quarter, as you're going to see in a little bit. You don't want to sit for financial and reg too close together, because you don't want to confuse the GAAP rules, the basis of an asset for GAAP, with the basis of an asset according to the IRS. So we don't want to mix and match our GAAP rules and our Internal Revenue Code. So if possible, don't sit for those 2 parts in the same window. On all 4 parts of the exam, all you need is a 75. Okay, no one gets 100. I don't know why, but the highest possible score is a 99%. You know, 75 is all you need. Listen, at the end of the day, if you're certified, nobody knows if you passed all 4 parts the first time. Nobody knows what your score was, okay? So getting certified. And just so that you know, it's the exception rather than the rule to pass all 4 parts the first time. And let me emphasize, because I did it doesn't make me I guarantee you I'm no smarter than anybody sitting out there. Definitely not. But what I make sure is nobody outworks me. So there are certain topics, certain subjects where everyone has their weak points where you're going to struggle, but that's okay. That's part of the process. You'll do better in some areas. You won't do as well in other areas. The real difference between success and failure is the time and effort you put in, making sure that you do all the questions in preparation for the exam, as we'll talk about later. You've got to pass all 4 parts within 18 months. So we're going to talk about the order in which you sit for the parts is very important. Okay. Now, experience. You don't need experience to sit for the exam. You don't. The experience requirement is for actually getting your license, okay? So the experience requirement varies from state to state again. Most states, again, require about 2 years of work experience under a CPA, okay? So under the direct supervision of a CPA. Some states, if you have a master's degree or 150 credit hours, it might only be a year. Other states, it might be longer. Now, you don't necessarily need to be in public accounting. You could be in industry and still meet the experience requirement, although it might take you longer. If you're not in public accounting, though, you want to make sure, again, you're under the supervision of a CPA. This way you can get certified. The type of work can vary. It could be tax, it could be audit, it could be managerial. But I would really worry about those things down the line. First thing is applying for the exam, passing the exam, and then the experience, that a world of opportunity will open to you after you start sitting for the exam and passing parts. By the way, when you apply to sit for the exam, you're going to pay fees that are based upon what sections of the exam you want to sit for. And every time you apply to take one or more sections of the exam, you're going to pay fees either directly to the Board of Accountancy or their designated agent, whatever the case may be. Now listen, if you reschedule an exam, there could be additional fees, but they generally do not refund anything, okay? Application exam fees are generally not refundable. So if you don't sit for a section of the exam that you paid for, they're not going to give you a refund. So you want to have a very good plan as to when you plan to sit for the exams. You don't want to make a donation to the State Board of Accountancy, that's for sure. Okay, so resources. Again, great place to start, as I've already mentioned, is NASBA.org, but a lot of you might be familiar with the Becker website. The Becker website has a link to all the State Boards of Accountancy. So if you want, if you happen to be, familiar with our website, you can certainly start there, but you just want to make sure, again, that you know the rules for your particular state, and don't be hesitant about shopping for a state. If any of you are international candidates or what have you, there are some states that are just more lenient than others. So obviously you can do that. Okay. Now, the key steps in going through the process. Review your state requirements, as we've already mentioned. So filling out your paperwork, application fee is going to be paid generally to your State Board of Accountancy, and then the examination fee depends upon which sections of the exam you're going to sign up for. So the application and exam fees are going to go either to the State Board and or NASBA. Now, applying for the exam, that could take 4 to 6 weeks to complete that application process. So as part of your overall planning, you don't want to be hassled with all this paperwork while you're trying to actually study for the exam. So just keep in mind, getting all the paperwork, filling it out could take a little while. Okay, now preparing for the exam itself. When you prepare for the exam, 2 steps involved. Obviously, the Becker course has so many outstanding tools. They have this planning. It's built within our software that helps you lay out what parts do you want to sit for, when do you want to sit for them. So when should you be looking to take the exam? When should you be looking to take the course to prepare for the exam? And then we're even going to lay out things like you never want to schedule an exam too closely to when the course ends. As a general rule of thumb, when the course ends and you've attended your last class, you're not anywhere near ready to take the exam yet. You generally need a week to 2, at least a week or 2 after the course ends to do your final review. So our study planner is going to help manage all the timing of all this. Now, your notice to schedule Okay, now the notice to schedule is very important. First of all, you can't take the exam unless you have your NTS from NASBA. So the NTS, once you have after your application is processed, then your notice to schedule, now you can start scheduling the various parts of the exam. Your NTS is going to list on it the sections of the exam you're approved to take. So that NTS, as a general rule of thumb, is 6 months. It tells you the earliest date you can take an exam, the latest date you could take the exam. Now again, most states are 6 months. Some states, Texas, California, Hawaii, Louisiana, it could be as little as 90 days. Virginia gives an NTS is good for 12 months. But that NTS is your golden ticket to come and sit for this exam. Now, scheduling the exam with Prometric. When you get your NTS, you want to schedule as quickly as possible after you receive your NTS with Prometric. Now, you're going to incur a rescheduling fee if you've got to change it, okay? So if you're going to schedule a date, you generally want to keep to it. But for the most part, the time and date you want to take the exam supersedes the location. So please be flexible, okay? You want to make sure that the date, is when you're ready to, you've already done your final review. You don't want to put the location first. So just be flexible with respect to that. You have generally a minimum. You got to give 5 days, at least 5 days advance notice before you can schedule to take a particular exam, okay? Now, the NTS, your golden ticket, it has your section ID, it has your launch code, your password that allows you to actually take the exam. So when you get that NTS, make multiple copies of it. You cannot lose that. Okay. Now, with respect to the exam itself, the scheduling, there are what we call 4 testing windows. There's a first, second, third, fourth quarter. Well, these windows, in every window, there are 2 months in which you can sit for the exam, 1 month that's closed where you can't sit. The reason you can't sit in that particular month is they're doing allowing for system and data bank maintenance and all that good stuff. So the first 2 months of every quarter, okay, you can schedule the exam. Now, if you should need to take a part more than one time, it's not the end of the world. The vast majority of people who are certified don't pass all 4 parts the first time, and it's not due to ability. It's because sometimes it's lack of time. You're working full time, and you're in busy season. It's not the end of the world. You just want to be mindful that if you want to resit for that particular part, you can't sit again in that particular window, that particular quarter. So if you get your results and you fail, then you're going to have to sit for that part again, but obviously you got to wait to the next window. So you got to receive your score or allow the NTS to expire before you can apply for that same section again. Again, you got to pass all 4 parts within 18 months. So you never leave the hardest part for last, ever. So which part by far takes the longest to study for? Financial accounting and reporting. So the financial accounting and reporting, this has the most information of the 4 sections. You generally want to take financial when you have the most time available to study. So for those of you who are still in school, that summer before you graduate, you want to take advantage of that time and try to get at least 2 or 3 parts out of the way before you start working full time. It is incredibly difficult to study for financial and work full time. I mean, it can be done, but all things being equal, you never want to study for financial in busy season, and you'd like to get that out of the way before you start working full time. We have 10 classes in financial. Each class is approximately 4 hours. So you're going to be doing about 40 hours with us in preparation for financial. For every hour you put in class, you're going to be putting in easily 3 to 4 hours outside of class. You'll easily be putting in 120 hours on your own, reviewing the homework, practicing questions. So it's going to take you anywhere between 150 maybe to 200 hours to be thoroughly prepared for the financial section of the exam. Now, the way the financial section works, it's a 4-hour exam. You always want to arrive at the exam center a half hour before the scheduled time. So you always want to get there a half hour early. The financial section, again, is made up of multiple choice and task-based simulations. Now, the multiple choice questions, every testlet, which is basically a group of questions that are constructed to appear together. Well, in financial, you're going to have between 24 and 30 questions per testlet. You're going to have about 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes per question. Okay, so you got to know your stuff and you got to know it well. Then you're going to have what's called task-based simulations. And in financial, we've got 7 of these. Basically, a task-based simulation is like a case study. You know, they want to test your knowledge and skills, but try to use it like real-life work-related situations. So in financial, you know, filling out a statement of cash flow, as you'll see later, or filling in a balance sheet, income statement, you know, whatever it may be, completing a bond amortization schedule. I know you're loving that one. But a bond amortization schedule, I mean, these things lend themselves well to task-based simulations. Usually they take about 8 to 15 minutes per case, okay, depending upon the part of the exam. Now, every testlet, whether it's multiple choice, task-based simulations, or in BEC, written communications, could have pre-test questions. What's so important about that is, and we'll develop this as you study for the exam, but your strategy, you never, ever waste time on a single multiple choice, ever. God forbid you spend, again, I said you have 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes a question on average. If you spend 6 or 7 minutes on a multiple choice question, I could care less whether you get it right or wrong. It doesn't matter. You spend way too much time on that question. And what's going to happen is, invariably, you're going to start to rush. And what would have been easy is going to become more difficult. And now you're going to start making silly mistakes because you're rushing. So you never want to spend too much time on an individual question. And then worst case scenario, it's a pre-testing question. And it doesn't even count toward your score. And now you couldn't finish the exam because you spent too much time on a question that didn't even count. You have no way of knowing which questions are pre-test questions, okay? So you never, ever spin your wheels on an individual question, or task-based simulation for that matter. Okay, now the content of financial, this is kind of like everything you've seen in intermediate as well as advanced accounting. So that's what makes this so challenging. 2 semesters of intermediate, a semester of advanced accounting, it's a ton of information. Governmental and not-for-profit, I'll tell you, a lot of our candidates come into the course, and although Becker is quote-unquote a review course, truth be told, so many of our candidates have never seen governmental and not-for-profit. As Jeff mentioned, I taught at Fordham University. Fordham is one of many universities that, you know, governmental and not-for-profit is either a little part of advanced or it's not taught at all. That's okay. Our course recognizes that, and although technically we're called a review course, the truth is that we realize a lot of times you'll be learning this information for the first time. So here's what I need to stress. When you study for the exam and you put together your study plan, you want to look at what the content is, and you've got to make an honest assessment. If it's something you've never seen before or you didn't do very well in college, the first time you come to class, you're learning it. The second time you go through the lecture, you're reviewing it. The third time you go through it and work all the questions, then you're mastering it. So it just may take you a little bit longer, but you can certainly do it. IFRS, depending upon, you know, your situation, you may or may not have a lot of exposure to IFRS. We realize that. We're going to teach you everything you need to know about the key differences between US GAAP and IFRS. Okay, audit, for the most part, audit, you know, many of our students very well prepared for audit in terms of the college curriculum. So whether you had 1 full semester or 2 semesters in auditing, you know, people tend to do pretty well in audit. But here's my advice. If you're going to work in audit as a professional upon graduation, you might want to think about sitting for audit last. Why would I recommend sitting for audit last? Because this will probably be a lot easier for you to absorb and understand as you start working as an auditor in the profession. So you don't want to leave your hardest part to last. Audit might be your easiest part if that's what you're going to do for a living. And with all the new hire training you get and then practicing day in, day out in audit, it'll be a hell of a lot easier if you have to work full-time and study for audit if that's what you do for a living. Now, audit is a 4-hour exam like financial. So you've got 3 testlets containing multiple choice. Again, you got 1 testlet containing 7 task-based simulations. And again, just like financial, you're going to have certain questions, certain multiple choice, task-based simulation that are pre-test that don't count toward your score. So audit for a lot of you, the accounting review, the engagements, responsibilities. By the way, professional responsibilities, you know, that's covered in tax, it's covered a little bit in law, it's covered a little bit in BEC, so obviously ethics and professional responsibilities is emphasized throughout the curriculum. But nonetheless, audit's not going to give a lot of you problems. We have 6 classes in audit, again, 4 hours per class, so you'll be doing 24 hours with us in class. You're easily going to do another 72 hours outside of class, so you could be looking at about 96 hours to be fully prepared for the audit. Okay, now, when information becomes testable, this is important. So whether it's tax or sometimes changes in auditing standards, financial accounting and reporting, whatever it may be, generally these new pronouncements are eligible to be tested on the exam in a window beginning 6 months, as a general rule of thumb, 6 months after that pronouncement's effective date or issuance date if they allow for early adoption. Bottom line is, when you study with Becker, we're going to have on our website, if there's any updates, if for whatever reason you're taking the course, but then you're delayed into when you're going to actually sit for the exam, you just want to check on our website with respect to that particular section of the exam to see if there are new standards or new pronouncements, and then we'll have that information available for you so that you can update your materials before you physically sit for that part of the exam. Okay, the regulation section. For those of you who plan on doing tax for a living, this might be the part you might want to leave for last. If you're going to do tax for a living, and again, obviously you're going to get all the new hire training, you're doing it day in, day out, regulation's probably a part you want to consider leaving for last. Exam time, a little bit shorter. It's only a 3-hour exam. Again, you're going to have 3 testlets with multiple choice. So you're going to have 72 questions there. And then you're going to have 1 testlet, but instead of 7, you're only going to have 6 of those task-based simulations, those cases. And it's obvious in regulation, certain things lend themselves well to a case. Filling out a 1040, 1065, an 1120, 706, 709, whatever it may be. Okay, we'll walk you through that process in the course, but obviously filling out the tax forms is something that you're going to be asked to do. Now, insofar as the content goes, everyone to be eligible to sit for this exam, you've had a class in individual tax. What you may not have had a class in is taxation of entities, partnerships, corporate tax, or taxation of property transactions, so gift, estate, trust taxation. So if you're still in school and you have electives, take that second class in tax. Even if your school doesn't require it, and even though it's not required to sit for the exam, you could have 1 class in tax and still be eligible to sit. You want to take that second class in tax because 60% of regulation is tax. But even beyond that, when the average person on the street hears you're a CPA, what do they immediately expect you to be an expert in? Tax. So it'll pay you back the rest of your career. And, you know, you might be sitting in college right now thinking you're going to do audit. You may not like audit. You may want to do tax. So you want to have that flexibility. So it's definitely advisable to take that second class in tax. The other 40% of this exam is made up of a combination of business law and ethics, professional and legal responsibilities. So even though there's no math involved, it's still very important. The business law is voluminous. You've got contract law, UCC, secure transactions, accountant's legal liability, bankruptcy, which is what we're all hoping to avoid. That's why we want to pass the exam. So obviously a ton of stuff, but don't sit for regulation and financial in that same testing window because you don't want to mix up the GAAP rules with the tax rules. Okay, now business environment and concepts. BEC is unique because this is the only section of the exam that has written communications, okay, which I'll talk about in a second. But you're going to have 3 testlets containing multiple choice, again, a total of 72 multiple choice. And then you're going to have 3 written communication tasks. So the written communication task, that's only in BEC. And, you know, candidates basically what they're going to ask you to do is go through a scenario and then write some kind of appropriate document that relates to that case. So, you know, the instructions are going to tell you what form this writing should take. It could be a memo. It could be a letter. They'll tell you what to focus on. But really, they want to make sure that you could write in a clear, complete, concise, and professional way. So for the most part, if English is your first language and you've been educated in the U.S., you've written essays in English before, not a big deal. Our international students may have to spend a little more time preparing for the written communications. But for the most part, if you work through all our software, you'll be in good shape. And look at the split. 85% of the BEC section of the exam is multiple choice. For all the other parts there, it was 60%. Okay, look at that, 60% for all the other parts. So in BEC, your performance on the multiple choice is really going to dictate your success or failure. Now, the content in BEC. BEC, like financial, to me, BEC and financial are the parts you probably want to get out of the way early on, because you're probably not going to be practicing, for the most part, in strategic planning or financial management. So for the most part, BEC and financial are early on. Hello? I thought I was getting a little echo. No worries. So in any event, if you could still hear me, I might be talking to myself, but that wouldn't be the first time. So in BEC, your topics, now econ, relatively new on the exam. Financial management, a lot of corporate finance, relatively new on the exam. Corporate governance, relatively new on the exam. So another key issue in BEC, merely working old questions is not going to be sufficient to prepare for BEC. You know, the financial, the audit, the tax, and the law all have very long histories on the exam. Therefore, by virtue of working the questions in our software, you're going to be really well prepared. The BEC, because these topics are relatively new, we don't have that old library. It doesn't exist of old questions because it hasn't been on the exam. So you got to pay a little bit more attention to the lectures, to the notes, to the examples and problems embedded in the textbook. The rest of BEC is the cost and managerial, and it's so ironic that we're given a 3-credit course in cost, a 3-credit course in managerial accounting, and yet together it's like 25% of one little section of the exam. So nonetheless, cost and managerial, you'll see it in the BEC. Okay, now being familiar with the exam functionality. So, do you see what we have in front of us? This is what a multiple choice question looks like. You're going to have this exact screen on the day of the exam with the exception of the Becker logo. So by virtue of practicing all the questions in our software, you'll be very, very familiar with the functionality. Notice it tells you the time you have remaining. I will mention after every testlet, the computer is going to say, would you like to take a break? You could take a break, not in the middle of a testlet, but at the end of a testlet before you open the next one. The problem is, if you take a break, the clock keeps ticking. So you never want to take a break, even though it's offered to you. So don't drink a lot of water or drink a lot of coffee while you're taking the exam because there's no time to leave and go to the bathroom. Worst case scenario, I've heard of people wearing a diaper during the exam, but it's only a rumor. Okay, the other thing is, stop using your real calculators. When you practice for the exam, you want to practice in exam conditions. What that means is you want to use the AI CPA tape calculator that we have embedded in our software so you're very familiar with the use of it for exam day. Okay, the simulations, again, virtually mirrors what you'll see exam day. These are the cases. They want to make sure you can fill out tax forms, or in this case, it's filling out a statement of cash flow, indirect methods, starting with net income. Big difference is you won't see the Becker logo, and unfortunately, on the day of the exam, you won't see a button with the solution on it, unfortunately. But you'll have all these different features, like for the simulations, what you could do is you could split the screen. So you see you have certain things you have to fill in here. This way you have all your information on the right. So you can do your statement of cash flow, operating, investing, financing, all that good stuff. You can't bring in scrap paper, but they will provide you scrap paper. So you should take advantage of that. Okay, the simulation, same thing. It's going to tell you your time remaining. And then do you see this thing called authoritative literature? When you complete the task-based simulations, you will use either whether it's FASB's, AICPA, Peekaboo, Internal Revenue Code. This database is going to include certain portions of that authoritative literature. And you've got to be used to using certain keywords, certain buzzwords. And you'll see that that's embedded in our textbooks. So the research task, again, in the real, they want to simulate real-world conditions. I mean, other than Tim Garrity, I don't think there's anybody out there who's a walking encyclopedia of all these, FASBs and codes and standards and what have you. So truth be told, in the real world, 10 years from now, if you're researching a lease, operating, should it be capitalized, whatever, you're going to have to do research. They just want to make sure you can intelligently determine, well, hey, what's the issue? What do we need to look up? What standards would apply? So then you could do your research. So that's all that is. Again, the written communication is in BEC only. It's only 15% of the exam. The written communications, again, by virtue of practicing what's in our software, you'll be very well prepared. But it's just like in college, identifying the key issues. What are the rules? What's your analysis? What's your conclusion? Make sure it's clear, complete, concise, and professional. Woo! Man, I feel like I just gave birth to a CPA. Boy, oh boy, we've said a lot. Let's see, is there anything else I can tell you about the exam? All kidding aside, we take what we do here very seriously. I mean, passing this exam or not passing this exam could change the rest of your life. And again, for most of you, I realize, you might be thinking, hey, I don't know if I want to do accounting the rest of my life. It doesn't matter. You got a degree in accounting, you've got to get certified, and it will pay you back the rest of your life. More job opportunities, more money certainly available, so it's worth the time and effort. The difference between success and failure, as I mentioned, is the time you put in. So I always advise people, you need to tell your boyfriend or girlfriend the importance of getting certified, and it's a commitment of time, and they need to support you. When you're studying for the exam, if they're giving you a hard time saying, hey, you're never around, all you do is study, you're a boring accountant, they're going to go out and let them go out and find somebody else. Because I'm telling you, after you get certified, you're going to be making so much more money. Chances are, if you wanted to, you could upgrade anyway. That aside, one more thing before I turn it back over to my friends at Becker. If you want to look at a little regression, your probability of passing, you can regress that against one independent variable, happiness or lack thereof. The relationship between the two is inverse. If you're happy, you're going to fail this exam because you're not putting in the time and effort. You're going to pass this exam if you're miserable. And miserable, I mean putting in short-term investment for a lifetime reward, return. You think I'm excited about this? I think I need to take a pill and calm down. Okay. Is anybody out there?
Yes, Peter, we're out here.
Okay, I think, Stacey, this is the time we're going to take some questions. And Stacey, I'll let you introduce yourself and the rest of the Becker folks.
Great. Thank you, Peter. Can everyone hear me okay? Thanks so much for your insights on the CPA exam. We have a lot of questions today. Our first question is, how well does an MBA or a master's program in accounting provide for preparation for the CPA exam? So which one should they look at taking?
I'm sorry, Stacey, a master's in accounting. What was the other choice?
MBA or master's in accounting.
An MBA to me, there are advantages and disadvantages. At MBA, to me, if you're relatively young, I always marvel at people who are 22 years old and know what they want to do forever. I like the idea of an MBA with the concentration in accounting to have the credits to be eligible to sit for the exam, but then the MBA gives you that diversity if you want to go into, investment banking or be an analyst someday. But there are advantages and disadvantages. If you know, hey, I want to be an accountant, this is my thing, get that master's in accounting, combine it with a CPA. Either one, to be eligible to sit for the exam, whether it's the generic MBA or a master's in accounting, it's going to give you the credits you need to be eligible to sit for the exam. So I wouldn't worry about the exam preparation. I mean, Becker's going to give you everything you need to know anyway. Try to think more long-term, what's going to give you the most options in your career. That would be my opinion.
Great, thanks, Peter. Another question was submitted from one of our listeners. How long does it take to receive your NTS? And can you get it via email or is it snail mail? So what advice can you provide to that candidate?
Okay, so your NTS, let's see. The NTS after the application process, you can elect, now correct me if I'm wrong, Stacey, but I think you have the ability to elect whether you get it either by snail mail, the old-fashioned way, or via email. So obviously you should opt to get that via email. So after the application process is done, it would be fastest if you elected to get it via email.
Absolutely, and this candidate is actually sitting in Illinois, and I have some personal experience with that. Basically, I submitted my my application to sit for the exam to the Illinois Board of Examiners. They review all of your credentials and provide you with an acceptance to sit, and then you actually go on to the NASBA website and register there, and the NTS comes back very quickly, and it is via email. You can select that option, and then you go on Prometric and you schedule your exam.
And I will mention with respect to Prometric, there's two ways of actually scheduling for the physical site where you take the exam. You could either do it using the internet, which provides you 24-hour access to scheduling, and it's going to avoid any on-hold, waiting time, all that stuff. Or with Prometric, there's a 800 number you can call to schedule your exams, but it's obviously much faster to do it via internet.
Great, Peter. We have one candidate that has taken audit a couple times unsuccessfully. What advice would you give her for, hopefully preparing another time with a successful outcome?
Okay, first of all, she's not alone. So like I said before, there's no shame in that. So, it is what it is. I think you want to make sure you go through, sometimes people look at their score reports and say, well, I did pretty well here, and then they focus on other areas, and then their score goes up in one subject matter but goes down in another. So my suggestion would be to go through the lectures again, but most importantly, to me, the more times you work the questions, the better prepared you're going to be. And with respect to the audit, because it has such a long history on the exam, if you're working all the questions in the software, learning from your mistakes, to me, there's a lot of memorization in audit. While we sell flashcards, and flashcards are great, I think in areas like business law and audit, if you have the time to make your own flashcards, you'll be a little bit better prepared in terms of retaining that information. And then Becker has a product, I don't know if she's used the final review, but because that audit, again, it's a lot of information and a lot of memorization, that the final review sometimes helps you to, prioritize and summarize that mountain of information. It's a good way to do it in a condensed format just before the exam, so she might want to try that as well.
Great, Peter. Another question. If you don't pass all 4 parts in 18 months, do you have to retake all 4 parts? Or how do those expire?
No, so they expire one at a time. So the first part you passed is going to be the first part they would take away. So if you don't pass all 4 parts within 18 months of passing that first part, then you don't lose credit for all the parts, but that window starts to close, you'll lose credit for the first part. That's why I stressed earlier, never leave your hardest part for last, because then those parts that were easier that you took first, you're going to have to take them again. God forbid. You don't want to have that happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so is there any new testable content coming down the pipe for audit this year?
Yes, there was. As a matter of fact, I'll put that back up there for audit. Whoop. Let me see if I can get that back up there. But there are new pronouncements. I had mentioned earlier that as a general rule of thumb, it's, let's see, it's 6 months from the effective date or the date of early adoption. And yes, in June 2013, there's going to be new auditing standards that are subject to being tested. Actually, it's July of 2013. So again, depending upon when you sit for audit, you may or may not see these new standards on your exam. But, if for whatever reason you're delayed in taking audit, you're going to have to understand and know the new statements, which, again, our course is constantly updated, so there's no worries there. But all things being equal, if you get the exam out of the way earlier, you won't have to go through all the new standards that you would not obviously have seen in college. Hello? Stacy, did I lose you?
Hi, Peter. It's Lisa. I've been copying and pasting questions for Stacy. It does look like her audio is off, so she may be dialing back in.
No worries, no worries. Did you have any questions, Lisa?
I have so many questions you can't even imagine. We've got, I mean, your audience is a very curious crew. Here, let me get the last ones for you here. Do you need to submit an application for each section of the exam, or only once and then receive different NTSs?
So what happens is when you sign up for the exam, part of the fee that you pay, there's the generic application, but then there's the examination fee. And the examination fee depends upon which sections of the exam you sign up for. You do not need to sign up for all 4 sections for the first NTS. So if you know for a fact, and normally an NTS lasts for 6 months, so if you think during that 6-month period, those 2 windows that you're only going to be able to sit for 2 or 3 parts, then you would just sign up for those 2 or 3 parts, and then you could sit for them either in the first or second window within that NTS. Many candidates, you know, if you're not going to school, if you haven't started your full-time job, if you've just graduated, I mean, a lot of candidates will look to sign up for all 4 parts and look to take them over the 2 windows before they start working full-time. So whether it's some combination of April and May, or July and August, or July and August, October, November, but you don't need to sign up for all 4 parts. If you do, and you don't take all 4 parts, you'll have to submit another application for any parts that you signed up for but then didn't sit for. So you only want to sign up for parts you know you're going to take within that 6-month period of time. But yes, every time you apply to take 1 or more sections of the exam, you got to fill out the application and pay the fees.
Thank you, Peter. I'm sorry we got disconnected. I'm not sure if you heard the last question. We have a candidate that's working full-time. Were you able to provide suggestions for their study, for them preparing for the exam?
Yeah, no, I didn't hear that one, Stacy, but, you know, generic rules, first of all, you're in great company. I'm teaching tonight in New York City, and the vast majority of my students work full-time. It can be done, but obviously, you know, the weeknights, you got to do what you can after class to work questions in the morning, lunchtime, but really your Saturdays and Sundays are where you're doing your crunch time, as you know, and it's a sacrifice. No one can say it's not, but it's doable. It's done all the time. But for that, you know, period of time when you're taking the course and studying and you're working full time, it's like having 2 full-time jobs. You know, I mean, it can be done, but it's certainly challenging. But people do it all the time.
Yeah, you know, just really quickly from my personal experience, I am doing that now. I am studying for the exam, working full time. Like you said, I think you make a little bit of sacrifice during the week. You sacrifice some Saturdays and Sundays. And you just, you know, it's a process. You just kind of keep putting one foot in front of the other and tackling the books and the questions, and you'll get through it.
Yeah, you know, and you know, again, whether you're sitting for the bar exam, a CFA exam, CPA exam, if you're a doctor, whoever it is, I mean, this is, you know, this is the sacrifice you make early on in your career, but then you reap the benefits for the next 30, 40 years. But there's no doubt. I mean, it's hard. I mean, but that's what makes the credential valuable. If it was easy, everybody would be a CPA.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think we have time for just a couple more questions. One of our listeners started working in tax this January. Bearing in mind that tax season is January through April, is it advisable to sit for FAR or Reg, or opt for some other section?
For me, regulation. It's a no-brainer. If you do tax for a living and you're immersed in that and you're in busy season, I mean, of all the parts, regulation to me would be the easiest because that's what she does for a living. But, you know, busy season is busy season. You don't even have time to sleep, never mind study. So it's, you know, it's possible. I don't know what kind of hours she's working in the tax department. It's possible, but I certainly would not advise sitting for financial in busy season. I think that's be biting off more than you could chew, without a doubt.
So, can you provide candidates with some idea of the timing of score releases?
Yeah, I think they're a little bit more efficient with that now. Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, but Stacy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it could be as soon as 2 to 3 weeks, depending upon when you sit within a particular window. It could be as soon as 2 to 3 weeks after you sit, or it could be 3 to 6 weeks, depending upon when you sit in the window.
You're correct, Peter. Absolutely. Okay, well, I think that we've got, we're right at 1:55 now. We just a quick time check. I want to thank everyone for attending our CPA exam webinar today. Just as a reminder, we will be issuing a voucher for a 50% CPA exam review for one of our attendees today. So look for more communications on that in the future. I'd like to thank College Frog for asking us to be part of their National Meet the Firms Week. It's been a fantastic event, and we've really enjoyed being a partner with them. Peter, I'll turn it over to you and see if you have any final last comments for our listeners.
I just want to thank everybody for attending. I hope you got something out of this, and hopefully at some point in time we'll get the pleasure of meeting you guys in person, and I want to wish you the best of luck. And listen, we've all been there, so you can and you will do it. Just keep that motivation.
Great. Thank you, everyone. This concludes our webinar today.